Good afternoon. My name's Julian Hackenberg. I'll be running today's session. I work for MyHR Australia, and today's session really is covering everything that we think small and medium-sized businesses need to know in terms of returning to work. It's been a pretty tough time over the last couple of years. And so really today's focus is around sort of the HR implications of Australia and various states opening back up, and the things that small and medium-sized businesses should be across. So today's session really is covering a range of issues. I mean, firstly, we're looking at returning to the workplace. So looking at sort of government requirements around vaccinations, planning return to work with our employees, looking at work health safety implications. So looking at COVID safe plans, overall policies and procedures around that as well. And then in addition to that, really looking at recruitment, onboarding, retention, the various issues that we think employers within Australia are going to be facing over the near term. And looking at sort of how work has changed since COVID has come along. And then finally, we're sort of looking at a few compliance changes that have come about of late. So, various changes to awards, award rates, casual employees, and so on and so forth. So that's what today's session is going to be covering. A bit of housekeeping. The session is being recorded. There will be a recording available afterwards on the MyHR website. So really any questions will be recorded as well. So, just ensuring that we're only sharing details that we're comfortable sharing if we're submitting questions anonymously. If there are any questions, just feel free to put them through the chat, and we can address those at the end. So that's today's session. So just jumping straight into it, returning to the workplace. So I suppose there's a number of steps that we think employers, need to cover off in terms of going back to the office or even sort of, re-engaging employees. And firstly, it's really looking at the state and territory requirements around COVID vaccinations. And so with that, it's looking at what are the states requiring? So in New South Wales, for example, really vaccinations are now really mandatory for most businesses, particularly businesses open to customers. Must be fully vaxxed within Greater Sydney, and then looking out to the regions, we're sort of looking at a 1 November date in terms of full vaccination. Then there are sort of industry-specific requirements. So dates do tend to vary, and those are subject to public health orders. And of course, that varies from state to state. So likewise, Victoria has its own public health orders around vaccination requirements. I believe currently, there are mandates that apply to authorised workers within Victoria, and that has a really broad coverage. And really, employees, to my understanding, should have their first dose by the 15th of October, or have a booking by the 22nd of October. So it's really being across those sorts of requirements. And then I suppose the next sort of step beyond that is really understanding our rights as employers and employee rights when it comes to vaccination. This is a pretty complicated area, but I think firstly, the vaccination rates within Australia are pretty strong. So I think, a couple of months back, there was a lot of discussion around mandatory vaccinations and that sort of thing. But really the numbers, the way they are, New South Wales, ACT and Victoria as well, the vaccination numbers are so strong that it's unlikely to be such a large talking point. It's unlikely to be an issue that a lot of employers are going to have to confront in any case. I suppose in addition to that, the evidence, I think now clearly suggests that governments, the Fair Work Ombudsman, the Fair Work Commission, are very supportive of employers' efforts to get their workforce vaccinated. You know, you've got state-based health orders, which the coverage is increasing all the time. We've got the Fair Work Ombudsman advice around, you know, what would constitute a lawful and reasonable direction to get employees vaccinated. And you know, that provides as clear as possible advice, I think, to employers around, you know, how they can categorize the type of work that an employee performs, looking at the nature of their work, considering other factors such as community transmission, work health safety obligations, and so on and so forth. So, you know, in terms of a basic summary, I think governments and you know, Fair Work Ombudsman and Commissioner are pretty supportive of employers' efforts to get their workforce vaccinated. That's also been supported by a recent decision, not specifically relating to COVID-19, but in relation to influenza vaccination, whereby an employee, so it's a decision Kimber versus Sapphire Coast Community Aged Care. Basically, the employee refused to get an influenza vaccination. There was a public health order requiring, I believe, all attendees of aged care facilities to be vaccinated. The employee refused on health grounds. The employer questioned that, sought advice from the employee's treating medical practitioner. The advice didn't really support what the employee was saying. You know, the employer followed a process, but ultimately the employee's employment was terminated, and it was deemed that it was lawful and reasonable because the employee was unable to perform the inherent requirements of the role. So, you know, I think instances like that further support employers' efforts and a greater encouragement. But that doesn't take away from the fact that every case needs to be reviewed on an individual basis, looking at the individual circumstances, you know, the employee, the business, the employee's role, community spread, health conditions, you know, factoring in, you know, discriminatory grounds, the general protections under the Fair Work Act, work health safety risks, and that sort of thing. But in principle, there are tools there for employers if employees are refusing to be vaccinated and there's a public health order or there is, you know, lawful and reasonable grounds. So moving on from vaccinations, because I suppose we could sort of talk about that all day. You know, the next step really is planning the return to work, and I suppose the first thing is looking at, you know, the various challenges that could come about with that. So, you know, things that come to mind for mine really are, you know, some employees, you know, quite comfortable and happy sort of working from home full time, or they've got their own sort of arrangements in place and that sort of thing, so might be reluctant to return to the workplace. They may have concerns about, you know, their health and safety and that sort of thing when it comes to work, to returning to work. So I suppose there's an element of ensuring that, you know, we can definitely encourage and demonstrate to employees that, you know, we're meeting all our requirements to facilitate their return. Those are challenges. I suppose other challenges that come to mind might be, you know, having the appropriate policies and procedures around work health safety, might be sort of reduced space. So if we're ensuring that we've got, you know, good COVID safe plans in place, there might be some physical distancing requirements that go along with that as well. So that creates challenges around how are we sort of scheduling people's time in the office. And if you've got people who are reluctant to go back in any case, then you know, that might provide further incentive, perhaps not to return. In terms of, you know, some general points around that, I think consultation is a really strong approach, you know, for most things when it comes to the workplace. And I think, you know, consulting, communicating clearly with employees around what our intention is. I think another good thing really would be to provide employees the opportunity to conclude whatever arrangements they might have in place. So a reasonable time frame. You know, some workers might have, you know, specific arrangements when it comes to sort of childcare or health classes or whatever it might be. And of course, we want to make sure that we're not sort of being too burdensome, but at the same time, being quite clear around what the expectation is going forward. I suppose work from home is certainly with us now, and there's no escaping it really for a lot of roles. Of course, not all roles, but there's definitely, I think COVID's demonstrated that work from home is going to play a bigger role in our work lives going forward. So that obviously may need to play a part in how employees are engaged and how they're managed in the future as well. But in principle, I think also having really strong documentation in place around what's our work from home policy, what are in our employment contracts in terms of employees' places of work. If we're, requiring employees to come back to the workplace now, what does our contracts say around that? How strong are they? Job descriptions, which duties can and can't be performed from work. So we've got that sort of added discussion point around encouraging employees to return to work. And looking at operations as well. So the broader role that the employee plays within the operations and how that might be, they may be better placed to perform those within the actual office space or in a setting along with their colleagues. Look, and that sort of takes us nicely into work health safety. Of course, along with, various, issues that employees have to deal with around safety, COVID-19 is a risk that employers need to manage. The sort of state-based work health safety bodies have developed COVID safe plans. So, for example, within New South Wales, they have, provided some good documentation for employers to develop their own COVID safe plans based on their industry. Those templates are there. They cover most industries, and even where there is an industry coverage, there's general templates as well that can be applied across the board. And yeah, so that's a good starting point, and that really sort of covers off things like physical distancing, square meter rules, ventilation, and the like. But I think really the core things around work health safety really is sort of monitoring the state and government advice, consulting with workers, again, sort of going back to the consultation requirements, and that's a very strong part of our work health safety laws, and taking a risk management approach. So looking at, in terms of managing COVID-19 as a workplace risk, what are the controls that we can put in place? Now, of course, vaccination is the highest order risk control, but there are other things as well. So if employees are unwell, staying home from work, cleaning, hygiene in the workplace, mask wearing where appropriate, engineering controls to facilitate, physical distancing, and that sort of thing as well. So sort of taking that sort of broad risk management approach when it comes to work health safety, and of course documentation always helps to support that. Sort of moving along to the sort of third topic area for this afternoon's discussion is really looking at recruitment, onboarding, and retention. And I think there's a lot of talk at the moment around there being sort of two quite difficult challenges facing employers at the moment, particularly in Australia. One being skill shortages. I was reading something along the lines of 1 in 5 occupations in Australia suffering skill shortages at the moment. And obviously that creates difficulty around recruitment, and may require employers to sort of think outside of the box a little bit. Maybe, offering sort of a higher salary may not be sufficient. Maybe it is thinking about, how has work changed in terms of, work from home arrangements or hybrid work approaches, or overall flexibility in order to attract, talent going forward. I suppose the other element is this concept they're calling the Great Resignation, whereby, they're seeing significant numbers of employees in America having resigned since the start of 2021, and expecting the same thing to continue over here in Australia. I saw a study today, actually, whereby, there was a suggestion that up to 40% of workers in Australia are planning on resigning. So, I think it's one of those things that COVID has hit. We've had to sort of change up a few things, but it's really sort of brought to mind for a lot of people, what their priorities are, what they want to be doing. And I think sort of health, flexibility have sort of become a greater priority for a lot of people, and there's a workplace implication to that. So how do we address these things? Like I said, they're obviously very complex and difficult, and things that probably need to play out over a longer period of time. There's the obvious response to pay people more. It's an obvious one. My sense is, just having read a lot about this recently, is that may not be as good a fix as what it has been in the past. And that goes to the fact that employee preferences have changed, potentially away from being paid more and more towards flexibility. And there may be that element where business is really struggling at the moment, having had to respond to COVID and the like, and may not have the capacity to pay what it did prior to COVID, and so therefore it's sort of thinking beyond that, sort of pay more. Thinking about development opportunities. Do we have structured performance reviews and development plans for employees? Are there pathways in place so that people can see their sort of career progression, a year or 2 or 3 or 4 down the track? And of course, balancing work from home and flexibility in terms of those development requirements. So if you've got people sort of working from home, what sort of development are they actually getting if they're not in an office environment, sort of seeing how other people operate, and seeing more senior people and how they go about their work? So there's that impact as well, and how can we get around that? Of course, the sort of lifestyle and hybrid working elements come into play as well. A lot of businesses are already responding through things like doona days and flexibility around working hours, and offering options that are more to people's preferences. So that, I think, will continue to take place. Again, sort of a couple of studies I've read recently. 54% of employees value hybrid work as more important than a 5% pay increase. 90% of workers think hybrid work has improved their mental health, and 83% think it's improved their physical health. So it's all well and good to talk about hybrid work, and obviously work from home has played a big part over the last couple of years, but it's like, what sort of policies and procedures need to be in place? How do we need to make sure that we've got a good structure to make that happen? Because there are a number of models that could be put in place, but again, it's sort of thinking it through. I was reading something today just around sort of some key pillars for hybrid work, thinking about technology and infrastructure. Are our employees well equipped to actually work from home? In my experience, talking to a lot of people I know, often they're not, whether it be in their sort of work environment or the equipment that they're provided. How can we align employees working from home with the expectations of customers and clients and the mission of the organization? There's a big part is the culture element. So if you've got people working from home, how do you have that? How do you facilitate the company's culture within the people sort of working from home, and really looking at what sort of initiatives can we have in place? And so maybe coming to the office might become a bit more of a deliberate thing in the future. You're going into the office for specific reasons around collaboration and teamwork and company events and the like. Communication, balancing it with employee well-being and future skills. So sort of going back to earlier points I think I made around, hybrid doesn't necessarily mean, you work from home full time, you get no development opportunities, we just give you the work that we want you to do today. Well, it shouldn't mean that. It's sort of thinking about the broader implication around planning for the future and succession planning, planning for that individual's career as well. So just rounding out the discussion really, is just looking at a few sort of compliance changes that have taken place recently. We've got a couple of clients who, particularly down in Melbourne, have been basically had to stand down their employees for an extended period of time. And so really haven't been operating until quite recently. And so for a couple of them, they sort of had missed the whole awarding pay increases that took place from 1st July and 1st September as well. So, I suppose that's an important one is getting the award stuff right, because that's really the sort of foundation stuff. And on that note, there are increases that are occurring from 1 July, or the first full pay period after first full pay period after 1 November 2021. And so really that sort of impacts, businesses within hospitality, retail, hair and beauty, fitness. Those awards having a 2.5% increase to minimum wages from 1 November. So there's that element. Of course, there's been changes to casual employees. So at the start of the year, the government announced the Fair Work Act amendment around casual employment. And so that has a broad range of implications for employees engaging casuals, including how casual employees are defined, sort of offsetting arrangement using the casual loading. So a casual employment contract becomes really important in that case. The requirement to issue casual employees with a document known as the Casual Employment Information Statement. And similar to the Fair Work Information Statement, there's a specific requirement that employers provide that to employees. And there are new casual conversion requirements that came into effect under the National Employment Standards. So for businesses, for larger businesses with 15 or more employees, there's a requirement to offer casual conversion after 12 months of employment, or at least notify employees of reasons not to offer, provided it's based on reasonable grounds, or if an employee is not eligible to be offered casual conversion. And for employees, small businesses, so less than 15 employees, there's no requirement to offer casual conversion. However, employees can request conversion to permanent employment after 12 months. And sort of rounding out the whole compliance element is other changes to modern awards, including the Hospitality Award recently. There was a change that introduced loaded pay rates within that award. And so employees can absorb other award entitlements within a loaded rate under the award, including some overtime, some penalty rate entitlements as well. So that's another reason compliance issue that's come about sort of during this whole COVID quiet period, which a lot of employers may not be across. So look, that's pretty much what I wanted to go through today in terms of, getting back to business and running through the HR issues that come about when it comes to that. I can see in the chat that there's not really any questions as it stands. Feel free to add a question if you like into the chat, and we can address that. But in the meantime, just to sort of round things out, MyHR, we obviously provide a service to small and medium-sized businesses. We provided a hybrid model around sort of having a technology platform which provides efficiency around recruiting and managing employees, as well as providing advice and documentation and that sort of thing to assist employers as well. So we believe we provide the sort of tools that employers need to address the sorts of issues that we've discussed today, but also sort of broader range of HR issues as well. So so look, I think I might leave it at that. That covers off the session today. Thank you so much for joining. If you've got any questions, feel free to go onto our website, and our contact details are on there. Looks like I've got a question that's come up. Okay, cool. So this is a question. So what can you do if a staff member refuses to get vaccinated when they can work from home, but are also in a face-to-face sales-based role? That's a really good question, because that's one of those sort of, sort of grayish areas, I suppose. And I think it would come back to looking at, what the actual role is, taking COVID and the things that have been put in place since COVID in terms of work from home, and looking at what the inherent requirements of their role actually is. And so looking at, on a day-to-day basis, is it actually a requirement that they deal with customers and deal on a face-to-face? In an ideal world, then that's what I would be focusing on, rather than the temporary arrangement that's been put in place around work from home. So in that case, if in terms of a return to work, returns to their substantive inherent requirements, sees that they actually interact with customers, and you can demonstrate that there is actually a requirement that they do that, that there is an impact from them working from home in terms of their performance in the operations, and then you've got employment contracts and job descriptions and the like supporting that, to say that no, your role actually is interacting with customers on a day-to-day basis, then it's likely that would be a reasonable and lawful opportunity, a lawful and reasonable direction to require that employee be vaccinated. And so therefore it's a process around providing that having that discussion with them. So you'd really start off with sort of consultative discussion around, hey, what's the issue? What are your reservations? Is there a health issue or whatever else? And initiating that discussion, but sort of steering it towards, hey, look, we really need to sort of get back to where we were for all of these reasons. So therefore, we're giving you the opportunity to get vaccinated. And then from there, if there's still reluctance or even refusal, that's where you're looking at lawful and reasonable directions, and following a process around, are there health conditions? Let's get information and advice, consider that information before we sort of go down a more sort of drastic path. But certainly it seems, based on that information, that it would be reasonable if the employee's substantive duties require that they interact with customers on a day-to-day basis, physically, of course. All right, cool. Well, look, if there's no other questions, I might wrap it up there. But yeah, like I said, feel free to jump into our website. We can provide further information about our service. If you've got any other questions, you can of course direct them through the channels available there. So thank you for your time.